Assalamu alaikum. Ladies and gentlemen, if you remember, we have started Unit 4. We have finished the first story, the first lesson, determination. After that, we have started our next story, which is again a short story that is primarily written in French, which has been translated from French into English. The title is The Man Who Planted Trees. Don't forget that there is generic theme which keep itself repeating over and over again throughout the whole unit, and that theme is hope, courage and determination. That is basically the theme of the whole unit. Now, if you remember, in the previous lecture we stopped at page 146, right? I'm going to begin from the same point where we left in the previous lecture. So please open your books on page 146, the first paragraph. Just a quick review of the previous story that we have covered in the previous lecture. Let me tell you that first, and then we will proceed. This is the story about a man who is planting trees in a wilderness, in an area which is barren, and this land, interestingly, does not belong to this person who is basically planting trees here. So in the story we have discussed in the previous lecture that there is a man, the writer of the story of course, he visited a place which has never been visited by the tourist before, or it is not a well-known place that tourists mostly visit. He went on to discover those areas, and according to the writer, he found this place to be very harsh, barren, no greenery, etc. And he camped in a place which was quite wide open, and due to that geographical position of the writer, he said that the wind was fiercely blowing throughout the region and I could not risk staying there for a long time. So he had to move his camp, and he was also in search of water. In that search of water, he proceeded and he left that place, and when he was halfway down there, he found a silhouette, a sketch, and he mistook it for a tree or like something else, not a human being. But then when he get closer to that silhouette, he found that it was basically a man and a shepherd who was having 30 sheep around him, and they were all laying on that baking hot land or fields. That was the point where we left our previous lecture. So let's proceed from that point, page 146. I'm going to furthermore proceed with the story. He gave me a drink from his water gourd, and a little later took me to his cottage in a fold of the plain. He drew his water, excellent water, from a very deep natural well above which he had constructed a primitive winch. The writer is basically exploring the idea in the previous paragraph. If you remember, he explored the idea that I was not expecting anyone living in those areas, but he discovered a shepherd, right? So he was also searching for water. He went to that person, he gave him water, that shepherd gave him water, and he also offered him that you can stay with me in my cottage. This is the picture of a cottage, basically a small house in a countryside area where we or anyone who wants to live there. So it is not a permanent house. It is, but not a permanent house like we used to have in normal areas. So this is basically the picture of a cottage. You can see that. And furthermore, he offered him water. So that water was basically, it was taken out of a very deep natural well, which was of course very pure. There's a word with primitive winch. So what primitive winch is? This is what primitive winch is. This is basically the winch, right? That is basically that machine, or you might have studied that in physics also. It is used to take out water from the well, but in primitive time, So we have different form of this thing. This is basically the winch that was used to take out or pull out the water from the well. Look at the next paragraph. The man spoke little. Now this is the description. This is what we call descriptive writing. He is basically describing the character of the story. This is the way of those who live alone. He is commenting on the character, that he was not a very talkative person. He was silent, and furthermore he comments that this is how people who used to live alone develop the habit of less talking. But one felt that he was sure of himself and confident in his assurance. He was silent, although he was silent, but he was sure of himself. He knew what he was doing there. He was not a person who was bragging about his achievements, who would tell the stories, or who would, narrate different things to people that I'm doing this and that. He was not that type of person. He was silent and he was living alone. That was unexpected in this barren country. He said, I was not expecting that I will find a person in an area like this and he will be so sober. Sober in a manner that he was not talking too much. He was not bragging about his achievements. He lived not in a cabin. Now when we used to go for camping or a short trips or visits, we used to camp there. This is not a permanent residence, right? So we used to just try to manage it and just to spend a night or a couple of nights there. So we used to build cabins or camps, but that was not a cabin. But in a real house built of stone that bore plain evidence of how his own efforts had reclaimed the ruins he had found there on his arrival. The house that he built, the cottage that I earlier showed you the picture, it was a very well developed home. It was a house well constructed of stones, which means that he was there for a long time. He was a firm, steadfast person. It is indicated from the very living of that person, from the place that where he was living. It was indicated that he is a firm person, he is a steadfast person, and he is here for a long time. He is not going to give up. His roof was strong and sound. The roof of the cottage was strong because it is in a hilly area. We used to have so many rains and winds and storms, etc. So the roof was quite strong and sound, and it was in a very good condition. The wind on its tiles made the sound of the sea upon its shore, and the wind, which used to make a sound when it touches the water over a shore, the same sound was being produced by the roof of that house, which means the writer means to say that it was firm, it was a strong place to live, in short, right? Look at the next paragraph. The place was in order. Now writer is commenting on the things around his cottage, right? He will tell you now what type of accommodation he has. So the place was in order, the whole house was in a proper order, everything was on its place. It was not a messy place where things were in a disorder manner. It was very much in order. The dishes washed, the dishes or utensils that he used for eating, etc., they were all clean. The floor swept, everything was clean. His rifle oiled. He used to carry a rifle. Definitely when you are living in such an area, in such a place, this is really important for your own security, that you will carry a gun or a rifle for that. So it was also clean, neat and oiled. His soup was boiling over the fire, and he was basically preparing a soup for himself for his dinner. So it was also boiling over on the stove. I noticed then that he was cleanly shaved. Now for a person like a shepherd, we are not expecting a lot from him. We would believe that he will have torn out clothes, a beard maybe, or dirty clothes, dirty dressing. We are not expecting something good out of it. But that was not that type of shepherd. He was cleanly shaved. His shave was, it was maintained. That all his buttons were firmly sewed on. And again, we are not expecting a very good dressing from a person like that, but he was having very good shave. At the same time, his buttons in his shirt, they were completely sewed. There was no missing buttons in that. uh, that his clothing had been mended with the meticulous care that makes the mending invisible. Although he had old clothes that has been mended, but he was such a careful person that he mended his clothes, but with a lot of care that there were no footprints, there were no clear evidences of that sieving in his shirts. So he was a very sophisticated type of person. He shared his soup with me, and afterwards, when I offered my tobacco pouch, he told me that he did not smoke. The writer says he gave me the soup that was boiling over the stove, and after taking the soup, I offered him a tobacco, but he refused that he did not smoke. His dog, as silent as himself, was friendly without being servile, and he was also having a dog which was also silent. It was not barking a lot, and he was quite friendly. The dog was quite friendly, but at the same time, it was not submissive. Look at the next paragraph, the second last paragraph on this page 146. It was understood from the first that I should spend the night there. It was clearly evident he was searching for water and there was no water, and then he met this shepherd and he was a long way away from home and from the city, so it was evident that he will stay with the shepherd for night. The nearest village was still more than half a day away, and the closest village to that area was still quite far away, so he had to spend the night with him. And besides, I was perfectly familiar with the nature of the rare villages in that region. And he also knew that. The writer says that I knew that if I leave this cottage, if I leave this shepherd, where will I stay? There is no hope that I can land in a city or in a town where I can spend the night. So he had to stay with him. There were 4 or 5 of them scattered well apart from each other on these mountain slopes among white oak thickets at the extreme end of the wagon road. He is commenting on the less population of the area, that these villages were so far away from each other, and they were also being detached from each other. They were not attached to each other. And he was also commenting on white oak trees. What is oak and what is an oak tree? I'll show you on the multimedia here. This is how an oak tree looks like. This is the picture of an oak tree. And if I can show you in the next picture, the very leaf of this tree. I'll show you that. This is basically the leaf of that plant, which we call oak. And previously that I show you, this is the tree. We call an oak tree, right? All right. Let's move on. They were inhabited by charcoal burners, and the living was bad. These areas, this hilly mountainous area, was mostly occupied by charcoal burners, and the living was bad. It means that there was no water, it was barren land, so of course the living was hard here. Families crowded together in a climate that is excessively harsh both in winter and summer found no escape from the uneasing conflict of personalities. And we used to say that, for example, if you want to study a culture, if you want to study a society, language and its surrounding, both of them matters. Like for example, if you visit a very good place that is green, sophisticated, definitely the nature of the people will also somehow match with that. That is going to be in an equilibrium with that. But this area, this was barren, harsh, a very harsh wind used to blow in these areas. In the same way, the people were also, they were harsh, a bit, we can say, I won't use the word rude, but they were also not that sophisticated as compared to other areas. The men took their wagon loads of charcoal to the town and then returned while the women nursed their grievances. The people, the charcoal burners, they used to take their charcoals to the city where they used to sell it, and during that time when they are away from their homes, their women, they used to settle down their disputes, their domestic issues with each other. So it means they were not having very friendly relation with each other, I mean the women or the people that used to live at those villages, because as I mentioned earlier, that the environment, the overall environment of that area was a bit harsh, angry, and we can say that it was not quite friendly, in short. Look at the next paragraph, the last paragraph on this page 146. The shepherd went to fetch a small sack and poured out a heap of acorns on the table. Now, what is acorns? These are the seed of the oak trees. I'll also try to show you the picture. This is what acorns look like. It can be eaten and it can also be planted at the same time. So this is what we call acorns. So what this shepherd did, he went inside and he take out a sack full of these acorns. He began to inspect them one by one with great concentration, separating the good from the bad. When the shepherd went inside and he took out the bag or the sack of these acorns, he used to select the best one. For example, look at this picture. In this picture we have very good acorns. See, they are healthy acorns. We have empty, we have small, or that cannot be used for planting at least, right? So he used to select very good acorns out of them. So that is how he was, in a way of, he was scrutinizing the acorns. And he was doing it, this process, that the selection of good acorns, he was doing it with a lot of care, concentration and efforts. The writer says, I smoked my pipe. I was smoking. I did offer to him, and again I offered him, if you want to take this. Again he refused. And the writer says, I offered him help. I offered him help, that if you want, I can also help you out with selecting the best acorns. He told me that it was his job. He said, no, thank you, this is my job, I will do my job, I will select the best of them. And in fact, seeing the care he devoted to the task, I did not insist. And the writer is commenting again on the personality of the character, that he was so keen, so careful with the selection of these acorns. He was so keen about that I refused immediately, or I did not insist, because he was too careful with that, and I fear that I would want be in that position to do the same. That was the whole of our conversation. Initially, in the very start, the writer mentioned that he was not a very talkative person, so he said that was the whole conversation that we had. When he had set aside a large enough pile of good acorns, he counted them out by tens, meanwhile eliminating the small ones or those which were slightly cracked. He collected a huge amount of them, and then he was scrutinizing them, and during their scrutiny he selected the best one. For example, as I mentioned earlier, that he selected the whole bunch of acorns, but the best one, and he removed the other. For example, these type of acorns were removed from the sack. For now, he examined them more closely. He did it once more, again with a lot of concentration. When he had thus selected 100 perfect acorns, he stopped and went to bed. And when he was done with the selection, he selected the best acorns out of them, and after that process, he stopped and he went to bed. Now, from this point onwards, inshallah, we will discuss that in the next lecture, that what would be the end of the story. I will try to cover it up, inshallah, in the next lecture. I hope you have understood that. I will inshallah see you in the next lecture. Thank you.